night. We heard 4 very interesting, very diverse topics and interesting presentations, again on a variety of very sort of concise and in-depth looks at various aspects of Armenian history. Today, so I'm still thinking it's the evening, but today we're going to be continuing with 3 more speakers. Briefly, Robert Sukiasyan is going to be speaking first, and he's going to be speaking on a scheme for extortion and targeted eliminations of surviving Sivas Armenian community leaders in the summer of 1915. I almost didn't have room for the title, it was kind of long, but I squeezed it in. Ümit Kurt will give our second presentation, and it's on the fate of Armenian family wealth, confiscation of property in Ottoman Eintop during the First World War. And then our final speaker this morning will be Hazal Özdemir from Northwestern University, and she'll be speaking about they vowed never to never return, bureaucratic violence and border building in the Ottoman Empire. Now, each of our speakers is being allotted approximately 20 to 25 minutes, which should give us time this morning to have a little bit of conversation at the end if we have time, and there are people that do have questions, but we'll do that at the end of the entire presentation. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker today. He's Dr. Robert Sukiasyan, who is a researcher at the UNESCO Chair for the Prevention of Genocide and Other Atrocities at Yerevan State University. He is also working at American University and is affiliated with the USC Shoah Foundation. He was a Fulbright visiting scholar at the Promise Armenian Institute at UCLA just 2 years ago, I believe, and a fellow at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard University. Memory, oral history, cartography, maps, digital humanities are among his primary research interests. And his ongoing project is a micro-level study of the 1915 Armenian genocide deportations of Sepastia Sivas province, which aims to digitally map each deportation station and follow through the fate of each deportation caravan. So this is a very interesting, innovative project that's part of his dissertation, and now he's going to speak about it today. Dr. Robert Sukiasyan.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for having me here. So today I'm going to talk about one of the deportation centers.
You could speak into the mic.
Yeah, is this better?
Yes.
Yeah. My today's talk is dedicated to one of the deportation stations on the route to the Syrian desert from Sivas, and the forced uprooting of the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire through deportation on foot or via trades was an essential component of the Armenian genocide. During the summer of 1915, along the deportation route from Sivas and the surrounding regions, there were several transit points or centers, each with a special mission. So the events that unfolded to one of these stations at Kyotohan or Kyotununhan will be the focus of today's talk. This station is is at the borderline of Sivas and Harvard provinces, and was the last stop for Armenian deportees from the Sivas. So at Kyotohan, a gang disguised as Emniyet Komisyoni or Security Commission, comprising of Chetes, local government officials, and other figures associated with CUP, and the special organization operated here under the coordination of official bodies. Their objective was to target and exterminate surviving Armenian community leaders who had been spared during earlier executions in the region, and another big mission of this commission was the looting of caravans passing through it. So before I start talking about the actual events, I want to talk about my sources, and I want to start with the Armenian sources because they have exceptional value at shedding light on these events. So they provide a general overview of the deportation and describe conditions of deportations, methods of survival, cover topics which are not covered in official documentation, and also they're a good source on information on crimes and perpetrators which took place during the Armenian genocide. Armenians. I hugely base my studies on Armenian sources because of their kind of exclusive insights. Since we Armenian deportees or Armenian genocide victims are the only side to the event which were present at all stages of it, from the beginning until the end. The other sources don't have this, don't provide these insights. The gendarmes would change, or official documentation would hide things, and so they're not motivated to record all of these details, but the Armenian deportees. So the earliest Armenian sources coming up right after the genocide happened, and one of the earliest efforts was an effort of Aram Antonian in cooperation with Karapet Gabigyan, who were intellectuals who made it to Aleppo, and they started a secret mission of collecting evidence. So they would interview deportees who were not literate and just accept the manuscripts of the ones who could write their memoirs. So these two people cooperated in Baron Hotel and piled up a huge amounts of Armenian genocide evidence, which is now preserved in Novarian Library. So this is one of the first bodies of evidence which I have. The most important source on the genocide in Sivas is Karapet Gabigyan, the person on the left, who started writing his memoirs early on, even during the deportations. So the first copy he made was in Raqqa on the route to Aleppo, which he gave to his relative, but it was destroyed because of fear. It had to be passed to the German consul in Aleppo, but it didn't happen. So he started writing his second version, the left top corner, and gave this one to Aram Antonian to be published, but he never did. So he had to go through it for the third time, and he published it in series in Chicago Yerda Sarkayastan newspaper. Later on, it came out as a book in 1924. So it makes it like one of the earliest and best studies on Armenian genocide, because Karapet is not only a witness but a very skilled researcher himself. So this book has exceptional value. Also, it includes some survivor testimonies from other survivors too. Aram Antonian's collection also holds these verdicts, indictments, which were a result of cooperation of refugees which came together and made these compatriotic unions and prepared documents to be presented at the Paris conference. And it has like a lot of details, description of routes and whatever was lost. So that's another source. Yeah, a big one is the archive of National Archives of Armenia, because there were like certain bodies formed to interview the newcoming deportees, and there is also a big amount of evidence here too. Armenian Press was a place to publish the memoirs in series, and this is like another big body of evidence which was not really utilized. Of course, compatriotic union publications. This is all only a part of compatriotic publications from Sivas region. Monographs, collections of memoirs which were collected from like half of a century up until now. These are some of the California publications on the topic. There are about 5,500 oral history collections, and yeah, so that's about what we have from Armenian side. And there are missionary testimonies which are not really helpful to describe the deportations, because the missionaries were not deported, and they are helpful to describe a pre-genocide situation or a post-genocide situation, except one exception, which was the case of Mary Greffam, who was deported, who joined the caravans of deportees in Sivas. I will talk about it a little later. So, when it comes to Ottoman materials, I have access through this Jerusalem digitized collection at Clark University, and this is what I used. So this is helpful to look for seeing the Young Turks trials materials, which sometimes have information on the perpetrators. Yeah, so the province of Sivas had about 200,000 Armenians, about 200 churches, huge enrollment of students, about 20,000 students were enrolled, and Armenians were responsible for a big amount of importing and exporting from the town, and the trades and factory workers were also, many of them were Armenians. So before coming to the deportations, I want to present kind of short situation, how was the situation in Sivas, and I will start with the appointment of Muammar Bey in 1913, who right after he came to power started anti-Armenian actions. So there was an arson of Armenian factories and markets in the major cities of province after he came. Later on, before the deportation, with the start of World War, there was a conscription of men, disarmament of Armenian soldiers, and there were several big events which took part, and members of who operated the station were involved in these things, especially the murder of Sahak Odabasyan and the provocation on the poisoning of Turkish soldiers. These people I'm going to talk about were involved in these actions. So one moment. There were also confiscations of Armenian goods, and Armenian elites were jailed and eliminated in March, April of 1915, and 15,000 men were jailed. So this was the situation before the deportations. And deportations for Sivas started on July the 1st, I'll skip this part. So I'll start talking about the Kyoto station. The announcement of deportation was distributed through the leaders of Armenian churches and local governments. The doors of deportees were marked. There was not much time to prepare from 2 hours to 3 days in average. So there was an option to stay behind if they were skilled tradesmen with the condition of Islamization. And there were scheduled roundups of the entire population by force. So for example, in Sivas, there were 12 caravans coming out of the city from the 12 districts, so a district a day. Along the route to the Syrian desert, there were these temporary internment stations, and one I want to talk about is the Kyoto Han station, which was placed right on the border of Kharbert and Sivas, and it was like on the intersection of 3 main deportation routes, so it would kind of, other deportees from the north would be combined into caravans and were forced to pass this region, but it was mainly targeted the Sivas elites themselves, but also other caravans which passed through. So with the help of my friend, I could locate Manu Gavedikian from USC. I could locate stations on the route. So this was the general route, starting from Sivas and passing through Harvard. So Kyoto Han is one of these ones. People who operated here were So as deportation started, a group identified as the Emniyet Komisyonu or Security Commission was sent and stationed in this site, a road in with a stable known as Kyoto Han. So Security Commission was composed of individuals originating from the criminal social strata under the sponsorship of decision makers in the province, notably Halid Bey, an Ittihadist with roots in Caucasus, a member of special organization accused of brutally killing and trafficking brides and girls abducted from caravans traveling from Samsun, Amasya, Merzifonk, Tokat, along the Tonus Sarkeshla. So before coming here, he was responsible for some atrocities with the authorities. Another member was Kütükoglu Hüseyin, who had a close relationship with Armenians and spoke Armenian, who also was an Ittihadist and harsh critic of Abdul Hamid. And he was one of the organizers in the Alice River Valley. Another one was Tutunji Haji Halil, who was serving as a scribe in this commission. Emir Pasha Oğlu Hamid, also another member, knew Armenian, had even Armenian, Turkish, and Circassian roots, was speaking Armenian, was a former village head, and bodyguard of governor. Yeah. Yeah, besides these people, there were also a big number of Kurdish chetes armed with swords, axes, and knives who were stationed here. In this station, there were several targets. Main targets were the Armenian men, businessmen, tradesmen, former government officials, politicians, clergymen, and other community leaders, and just anybody who had graduated, so anybody who could potentially coordinate the caravans. So as the caravans approached this station, even before it, the gendarmes would warn deportees at the upcoming station about what was coming and demanded money for protection. So convoys were stopped before reaching the station, and lists of all deportees were prepared before entering. So they were listed. At the station, the commission presented itself as an official government body charged with safeguarding the personal belongings of deportees, as the tax bikers were to be expected along the road to Malatya. So after this, the men were detained. The officials informed that they had to hand their valuables, so they would receive it later on. The commission claimed that assets would be sent to Malatya, and there were several versions of these valuables. Versions was that it would be just handed over back in Malatya. Other versions included monthly installments or food handouts, or they promised that these valuables would be returned after the deportees' return. So I think they just came up with anything they could come up with on spot, because there are so many versions. So yeah, but also they warned that if they don't hand this over voluntarily, that would be killed. So there are several methods to extract valuables from these groups. For the first convoys, who were very well-known people and wealthy, they were staging attacks. They would stage an attack and they would perform a saving operation, so it would motivate people to hand out their valuables. Another method to make it easier, they would call the deportees in this commission and start before collection. Yeah, if the deportees tried to hide valuables, they would be subjected to exemplary punishments. Whoever cooperated were given some considerations, and so the men were placed in jail before this event, and after the first collection, the men would be imprisoned again. Yeah, at these stations, so they would set up tables and demand bribes and to let the men go after the second imprisonment. So at this station, there was killing. There was the special targeting and killing of prominent men according to the pre-arranged lists which survivors talk about, and the main targets were from men from 18 to 45 years old of age. So depending on the group, because the more educated, more influential groups were spared, were killed a little further away, and the other ones were killed, the men from these caravans were killed just on spot. So they were fully body searched, the cars were confiscated, and the gendarmes did another looting right after they passed through. After these killings and lootings, all of extracted valuables would be sent back to Sivas to be placed in Khalil Bey's house, who was the gendarme commander. So this was a coordinated effort and very structured and well organized. So according to our estimates, about 60 to 70 men were killed from each caravan, and 6 to 10 baskets of valuables were extracted. So priests of Saint Sarkis Church, Father Iravapar and Yeprem were stripped of clothes, tortured, and brutally killed, to give you some examples of the atrocities. Intellectuals and government workers such as Haritun Ansurian and Pascal Efendi in his 70s were tortured and killed. A Hanjak leader, Haritun Tujukian, was especially targeted and tortured by one of the members. So there was a case of a famous shoe repairer, Gezurin Skirikor, who had to give up 300 liras. The thing is that these people knew Armenians very well and were familiar with them and knew exactly who had what, and this also helped, and also the factor that they spoke Armenian also was another tool for eliminating this, for carrying out their mission. So, as I said, there was only one exclusion with the missionaries who became witnesses to deportations, and one of them, and she was Mayor Louis Greffem, who was stationed in Sivas, and he made special requests to Muammar, to the governor, to join the caravans, but even after refusal, she went on, and we have survivor testimonies that wherever she was present, there was special treatment to the deportees. And for example, at this station, the survivor tells that after these regular actions were carried out, when they noticed her, they performed stopping of a looting and recovery of goods, so she could report that later on. So because of this issue, she was soon turned back after several miles further from the station. But she quickly reported it, and it was published in Missionary Herald in US a couple of months later. So it was helpful. So to conclude, Armenian sources perfectly complement all of the other sources and provide most comprehensive insight for the deportation process during the Armenian genocide. It can be seen that an efficient deportation system was set up with the involvement of all levels of government, including CUP members, Teşkilat Mausa members, local governments, and Kurdish irregulars. So the model of security commission is also found and recorded in some other aspects near Sivas and surrounding regions. So this looks like it might have been a typical setup. This was the last hub for the deportations, leaving Sivas, and crimes against them must have been carried out with the most trusted men who also had some anti-Armenian experience proceeding these events. And after this station, the next station, the upcoming station was Hekimhan, where there was no differentiation between any status. So all men here were targeted, and whoever survived this one was killed in the upcoming Hasan Çelebi station, and later on there were some special operations with kidnapping and abducting Armenian orphans. So the very few men survived from Sivas, and yeah, so I just wanted to kind of show that there was this system, and this one station was specifically put together to eliminate the surviving elite and do the major looting before leaving Sivas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, for that fascinating, again, microhistory. We often don't know the exact details of deportation routes, and his work is much more extensive because he's done a lot of mapping. So thank you for that introductory brief for us, but we're going to be publishing these papers in a book, and then we'll see the full article with the pictures and everything else. I'm going to invite my colleague, Dr. Hazal Özdemir, to introduce our next speaker.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Dr. Ümit Kurt is no stranger to Fresno. He's been here many times as a visiting scholar and has spent a lot of time doing his doctoral research as well. Dr. Ümit Kurt is the assistant professor in the School of Humanities, Creative Industry, and Social Sciences, and an affiliate of the Center for the Study of Violence at the University of Newcastle in Australia. A former Polensky Fellow at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, he is the author of The Armenians of Aintab, The Economics of Genocide in an Ottoman Province. He received the Prose Award finalist in the category of World History by the Association of American Publishers, Aintab 1915, Genocide and Perpetrators, and the co-author of The Spirit of the Laws, The Plunder of Wealth in the Armenian Genocide. He is the co-editor of the volumes of Armenians and Kurds in the late Ottoman Empire and the Committee of Union and Progress, Founders, Ideology, and Structure. Please join me in welcoming Dr.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the generous introduction, dear Habok. It's happy to be back, and I'm very happy to be with you. So I would like to start with an anecdote or a quotation from one of the Aintab CUP members, Ali Beshe, and I will read the quote and then continue my presentation. So Ali Beshe wrote, in the aftermath of the Aintab War, Antep Harbi, there was this town crier walking around town and inviting those who had participated in the war to come to Tuzhana. Many locals of Aintab, including Ali Beshe, who was a prominent member of the Aintab's gentry and leading figure of the Aintab CP club, he also headed over. A guy told them to queue up in twos as they would let people in two at a time. It was Ali Beshe's turn. He went in and saw some keys placed on a rug. Each person takes two, commanded the guy in charge. There were also these medallions lying on the rug. Ali Beshe took a quick glance and said, "So, that is what we sail Aintab for? For two keys and a piece of things," unquote. And he left. Who would have guessed that those two keys belonged to the Armenians and there were keys to the two Armenian houses? What will happen to properties of Armenians left behind, and how will they be managed? So today is the crux of the matter in my presentation. Beginning in May 1915, a series of laws, decrees, and regulations that were known as the abundant properties laws, Lukyal Abrakner, in higher end, was introduced to address these questions, with the intention that the state should assume control of these properties and liquidate them based on self-serving priorities. As we will see, not a single legal arrangement was enacted to ensure that values equivalent to the seized properties would be provided to the Armenians at their deportation destinations. In the case of Aintab, the Aleppo Abandoned Properties Commission managed the confiscation and liquidation of properties, more specifically the Aintab Liquidation Commission, which was founded in late September 1915, oversaw this process. Each decision made in Aleppo and each coded telegram sent by the CUP government to Aleppo regarding the Armenian wealth was binding for Aintab Armenians too. Records of the Armenian properties and liquidation commissions, including any archival materials, on the original record of both the Aleppo Abandoned Properties Commission and Aintab Liquidation Commission are contained in the Ottoman archives but are inaccessible. Therefore, it's nearly impossible to paint a complete picture of how the legislation of abandoned properties was implemented in Aintab. However, certain documents from the relatives of survivors may help to demonstrate how movable and immovable properties were liquidated and auctioned by the Aintab Liquidation Commission over the course of deportation and genocide in the World War I. So let's start with the active participation of local elites in plunder. Motivated by the promise of acquiring Armenian properties, local elites meticulously carried out orders sent by the Unionists from the central government. To ensure the success of Armenian destruction, an executive committee was established with the encouragement of the district governor Ahmet Faik Bey and Aintab deputy Ali Cenani Bey. Its members included local notables, local CUP members, and civil and military officers. These members were the son of Debbah Kimyazadeh, who was a local merchant and a well-known provincial elite Kadir, the son of prominent local notable and large landowner Nuri Bey, the son-in-law of Seyyafzadeh, prison warden Zeki, the son of Gendarmerie Commander Hacı Halil, Seyyafzadeh Abdu Efendi, Nafi and Asaf Beys, Tahçızade Abdullah, Mennanzade Mustafa, Bulaşıkzade Arif Bey, and Ulema Bülbül Hoca. The committee selected 4 representatives and sent them to Derzor to see the actual living conditions of Aintab Armenians firsthand and ensure that the circumstances render it impossible for them to return to Aintab. Having done so, they could seize the Armenian properties without any reserve. So these 4 representatives were the son of Debbah Kimyazadeh. So I attend the high school of the grandchildren of this family, and this family acquired the surname Kimya after 1934, according to surname law, which was promulgated in 1924 in modern Turkey. The son of Nuri Bey, the son-in-law of Seyyafzadeh, and Zeki, the son of Hacı Halil. After confirming the dire situation of Aintab Armenians in Derzor, committee members freely participated in auctions organized by the Liquidation Commission. As they were close with Tevfik Bey, the president of the Aintab Liquidation Commission, they were able to purchase valuable Armenian items at a very low prices. The very existence of this committee demonstrates that deportation, expropriation, and extermination constitute a party policy and that a dual-track mechanism was in place. Alongside the government's official channels, another special network dealt with the process of confiscation and seizure through the CUP. In other words, local actors close to the CUP club in Aintab were active agents of this process. Government officials could receive orders and implement them, but it was these local agents who personally went to Derzor, illustrating the degree of their involvement. They were well placed to reap the benefits of the situation. They had already obtained a prominent role in the local organization and execution of the government's campaign against Armenians. These urban notables also possess, as Robert has just pointed out, crucial knowledge about the Armenian businessmen, their wealth, Armenian-owned real estate, and Armenians' other properties and economic activities. Therefore, the Muslim elite had a decisive advantage over government officials. The notables could quickly identify desirable properties and take action to obtain them. Moreover, with the notables' influence over the local administration, necessary official paperwork was an easily surmountable obstacle. Ali Cenani, one of those notables, conceded the fact that most of the well-off Armenians left their money and valuable items with the Ottoman Bank right before their deportation. This information was available in his file in the British National Archives, the Foreign Office. He was interrogated in 1919 before he was sent to Malta in exile. He claimed that the district governor Mehmet Şükrü Bey issued an order, quote, warning the Armenians and helped them to deposit their goods and belongings, unquote, in the charge of the Ottoman Bank. For that purpose, again Ali Cenani says, he rented Nazaryan Han and deposited all the Armenian goods therein, unquote. Later on, the Minister of Interior Talat Pasha, after having corresponded with the bank, gave an order that a commission should be formed with the right to sell these goods. The Ottoman Bank's employees also tried to persuade Armenians to entrust their valuables to the bank, assuring them that after the war, the money would be sent to the actual owners. However, when Aintab Armenians who were to be deported sent letters to the Ottoman Bank asking for money, the bank did not heed these requests. Leon Rahan, the manager of the bank's Aintab branch, played a significant role in the confiscation of Armenian properties. He attended meetings organized by Muslim notables and encouraged them to expropriate Armenian properties by deception. Initiated and organized by Aintab CUP branch members, these meetings were attended by provincial elites such as Hacı Fazılzade, Battal Hocazade, Halil Müftüzade, Abdu Efendi, Fazlı Ağazade Nuri Bey, Rıza Cenani Bey, Emin Beyzade Sadık Bey, Battal Beyzade İsmail Bey, and so on and so forth. So all these names again are available in the file and the documents compiled by Aramandonyan on Aintab after the genocide. Others included pro-CUP civil and military officers such as Police Captain Körükçü Hafızzade Mustafa, Police Officer Hacı Zabitzade Ahmet Efendi, Gendarmerie Surgeons Müsluzade Mehmet and Çubukçu Ali, Ulema Kürt Muhammed, Ulema Talipzade Arif Efendi, again Ulema Bülbül Hoca, Head of Treasury Besim Bey, and the Judge Bilal Hilmi. So this list of names demonstrates clearly how different sections of society from Aintab directly and actively participated in the looting and the destruction process as a whole. Furthermore, Rahan, the head of the Ottoman Bank in Aintab, encouraged Armenians to deposit their money, gold, jewelry, notes, personal assets, and bills of exchange in the bank before deportation. While some Armenian tradesmen considered the Ottoman Bank a safe place to store their wealth, once the deportation had commenced, Rahan founded a company along with certain Muslim elites and put the bills and commercial documents Armenians had entrusted to the bank up for sale. These assets were then purchased for 40–50% of their real value by Rahan or on behalf of his company. He was also present at the sales of gold and other valuables deposited by Armenians to the Ottoman Bank through auctions organized by the Aintab Liquidation Commission. Ahmet Faik Bey, the district governor of Aintab then, he too exploited this situation, purchasing for only a nominal amount of money hand-made embroidered silk clothing Armenians had entrusted to the Ottoman Bank before their deportation. Later, these articles were sent to Enver, Cemal and Talat Pashas, misrepresented as a gift of handmade work of Muslim women. Besim Bey, another local leader and provincial treasurer in Aintab, participated in the massacres and the looting during the deportations, and he later stole gold from Armenians during the genocide. While attempting to escape British custody, he was apprehended in Pozantı, it was a town in the Adana province, with this gold on January 23, 1919. The gold was confiscated by the French Extraordinary Commissariat under the orders of British General MacAndrews. On May 1, 1920, the Ottoman government petitioned the French Extraordinary Commissariat to no avail for the return of Besim Bey's gold. The same Besim Bey will also play a significant role in the National Liberation War against French forces in Aintab in 1920 and 21. So, to provide a clearer picture of the situation in Aintab, I want to briefly analyze the socioeconomic conditions of the city with a particular focus on the role of Armenians in the economy on the eve of war. Before the World War I, Armenians were dominant in profitable economic sectors such as textiles, agricultural goods, tobacco, and cotton. They were also prominent in almost all artisanal fields: photography, ironworking, copperworking, silver plating, jewelry making, tailoring, shoemaking, painting, multicolor weaving, coloring, bakery, and bread making. Armenians held the majority of places in professions that required a high level of education and brought the highest level of income, such as doctors, pharmacists, lawyers, and dentists. Sectors like banking and brokering too were generally in the hands of Armenians. For example, the type and the number of businesses owned and operated by 684 Aintab Armenian families in 1913 were as follows on the screen. This economic wealth began to change hands following the Armenians' deportation right away. This wealth was liquidated by the commissions and was used for various purposes. With the redistribution of Armenian properties, a new wealthy Turkish Muslim elite class emerged in Aintab after 1915, and it's possible to divide the emergence of this new class into two periods. The first one took place in 1915-1918, when the Aintab's new elite bourgeois was born. The second period was from 1921 to 1922, when this new class social status was consolidated through the liquidation of Armenians' wealth and property. Of course, we should talk about the fire sales and profiteering in Aintab during when the deportations were taking place on the ground. The first deportees who left Aintab were promised that this was a temporary arrangement and they would return to their homes in a few months. According to some survivor accounts, Armenians were told that they could leave everything, lock their doors, and either hold on to their keys or leave them with a neighbor or a muhtar. They were also assured that the government would carefully seal their properties and protect them. However, those who received their deportation notice start to put their belongings up for sale at fire sale rates. Many Armenian families sought to rent or buy draft animals to be able to endure the long and hard road that lay ahead. Those who bore the heaviest brunt were well-off Armenian families from the middle or higher classes, particularly Armenian merchants and tradesmen. After the deportation decision became definitive, they wanted to convert as many of their assets as possible to currency, therefore they put everything they owned on the market. Some trusted their Muslim neighbors with their valuables and other properties, hoping that they would eventually be able to reclaim them upon their return. Haruchun Nazaryan, a survivor, explains the fate of his father's property after receiving the deportation news. Quote, "My father had pistachio groves and 100 BVs. He was doing this business in partnership with a muhtar from a nearby village. The morning he received the news about our deportation, my father's business partner came to our house and told him that my father should entrust all the belongings in his house. He would store this somewhere with the intention of returning them when we got back. In fact, he knew what was going to happen to us, but he was not able to express this frankly." Unquote. For Muslims, this was a lifetime opportunity to seize the spoils. Kayacik and the other Armenian neighborhoods surrounding it were transformed into a huge open bazaars in early August 1950. Hundreds of thousands of gold coins were sold for a fraction of their worth. Everything movable was displaced in the streets, and the Muslims began to purchase these items for as cheap as dirt. Massive amounts of bedding, furniture, utensils were piled up in the Armenian quarter and sold at auction, seldom bringing more than 1/5 of their value, often for less than that. Buyers determined the prices. On the one hand, there were those who offered, "If you don't want to leave this behind, here is the price." On the other hand, there were those who tried to deceive Armenians, saying, "Let's put the stuff in my storeroom, it's yours when you return, do not sell them in the auction." In his report sent to Henry Morgenthau on August 19, 1915, Aleppo consul Jesse Jackson describes the event of this profiteering. Quote, "The Armenian community of Aintab was the wealthiest of the kind in his part of the empire, offering a splendid opportunity for pillage. Their household belongings were left behind to be taken by the first plunderer to arrive. Most of the merchants of the city being Armenians, their stocks likewise disappeared. It was a gigantic plundering scheme as well as a final blow to extinguishing the race. So let's talk about the extent and amount of landed properties of Aintab Armenians. Let's give some figures. So there were 600,000 residential homes and 7,000 parcels of land that belong to Aintab Armenians. It's possible to divide the seized land properties into 4 categories. Major immovable properties of the wealthy families, middle or second class immovable assets, public properties, and last but not least, national properties of churches, properties owned by religious institutions. Families in the first category had numerous properties in and outside of Aintab, including villages, farms, pistachio groves, fruit orchards, fields, vineyards, inns, coffee houses, shops, and watermills. In the second category, people own relatively small properties, all but hotels included in the first category. In the third, there were 700 families. Of these, 100 did not even own a house. They had landlords or lived with other people. The remaining 600 families resided in their own houses. Among them, there were also low-income families who possessed 2 to 5 orchards. The properties within the fourth category belong to Surp Asvazatsi Yegeretsi and other churches. These included buildings surrounding these churches, 25 shops, 2 mills owned by Armenian Catholic and Protestants, the library that bore the name of Niziklia, a coffee house, the Millet Inn building, as well as several other buildings like Kürtçühane, and the buildings of the Vartanyan, Atenegan, along with six shops inside, Nersesyan, Haygazyan, Hayganusyan Seminary, and the Giligya Cemaran schools. It's possible to expand the list of estates mentioned actually, together with houses and uncultivated lands that belong to Surp Asvazatsi in various towns and villages such as Jidin, Ehnesh, Orul, and Nizip, as well as small churches and the land owned by the Sis Catholicate throughout these areas. A clear picture of the confiscated Armenian estates come into view. All these estates were at the disposal of the CUP government under the abandoned properties laws. So this is the image of Surp Asvazatsi Yegeretsi, the Gregorian church in Aintab, St. Mary Church. So these properties, they were used for military, to meet the military and governmental needs. For instance, during the deportation, all of the non-Muslim schools were seized by the government, except those belonging to American Board missionaries. The Ottoman army also appropriated the buildings of Vartanyan and Barsumyan schools in the city. Again, on February 19, 1916, the Giligya Cemaran was transformed into a military hospital. In 1916, when the war was at its most violent, Armenian neighborhoods were completely evacuated and ceded to the army. Some of those houses were rented out for pittance, the rent of which was collected by the government. Among the numerous wealthy and prosperous Armenians who lived in Kayacık were Nazaretyan, Aşçıyan, Uzun Toros, Garuj Efendi Karamanukyan, Hovannes Ceveciyan, Harutun Nazaryan, Garabet Belgian family, the well-known Belgian family, the Kürtçüyan family, Hovannes Levonyan, Bozlakyans, and so on and so forth, Hadidyans, Kalfayans, and so on and so forth. Ottoman soldiers were settled in their houses. The Aintab Liquidation Commission later sold these houses to pro-CUP local elites and notables of Aintab by auction in early 1960. Of course, Armenian properties were also utilized for the purposes of facilitating the settlement of Muslim refugees and immigrants in Aintab. By late September 1915, Muslim refugees were being settled in Armenian houses already. On October 25th of the same year, a letter was sent to the Liquidation Commission stating that immigrants who had been sent to resettlement areas should be placed in vacated homes. It never says the vacated homes of Armenians, vacated homes specifically. And all their needs should be addressed. So, they also acquired shops and businesses, so-called abandoned by Armenians. In fact, on November 2nd, the Minister of Interior, Talat, ordered the distribution of Armenian shops and paraphernalia to the refugees. Talat instructed that in the case of overcrowding, the Muslim en route to Diyarbakir will be rerouted to Urfa, Aintab and Marash, and they should be supported with supplies from the abandoned properties. In some instances, there were attempts to sell Armenian vineyards, garden, mulberry groves, and so on to Aintab locals, but the Minister of Interior ordered the cessation of such attempts, stating that the estates in question must be used for immigrants. Muhacirler için kullanılmalı. Yervan Küçükyan, a survivor, describes how an Armenian house was given the refugees settled in Aintab. Quote, after Daglians were exiled, another tenant came. He came in with a goat and directly tied it to the room with red marble floors. One thing I remember was that the new tenant was a Turkish family. Unquote. So, having demonstrated the various mechanisms of the process of confiscation, next I will examine briefly how Armenian properties were plundered and liquidated by focusing on the personal histories of three Armenian families, Yakupians, Danielians, and Nazaretians, which shed light on how thousands of Armenian families lost their wealth. On the one hand, the wealth of the Danielian and Nazaretian families is reviewed on the basis of their title deeds. These two families present only two examples of numerous Aintab Armenians who live abroad and still held their deeds. On the other hand, two documents provided by Sarkis Yakupian's family offer a previously undiscovered aspect of the liquidation process in Aintab. Yakupian's lists are of great significance, as they hint at what information on liquidated Armenian movable and immovable properties the Ottoman archives might conceal. Nevertheless, part of the correspondence of the Minister of Interior may be overlooked, and amid the documents scattered among the Republican archives of the Prime Ministry and archive of the General Directorate of Land and Settlement, and among these records, some documents are directly related to the duties and functions of liquidation commissions. By the way, when you come up with these kind of documents in the archives, when they realize, they take them down from the catalogs right away. I would have done the same actually. So, first Yakupian document includes a list of the family's properties registered by the Ottoman Bank, as you see. Let's jump to the transcription. So, it was registered by the Ottoman Bank in order to be submitted to the Aintab Liquidation Commission immediately following the family's deportation. The second document consists of another list. I will just jump to that in a second, which indicates the Commission's auction results, along with the detailed information on buyers and prices of these assets. Therefore, this record is an original document of the official transaction, revealing for the first time the process of liquidation and auction executed by the Aintab Liquidation Commission. That official document proves the state thiefness, state burglary, officially, and how they use a number of concocted ways to carry out all this process under the veneer of legality. So, the properties listed in Yakupian documents were registered at the Ottoman Bank on behalf of Sarkis Yakupian and his family on October 19, 1915. The bank surrendered these properties to the Aintab Liquidation Commission May 13, 1916. Soon after, June 1st, the commission auctioned these properties. After 3 weeks, they start auctions. The list dated May 13 includes the number and type of the movable goods and items as well as real estate, whereas the list dated June 3rd offers the details of who purchased these assets and at what price. As can be seen in this slide, most of the Yakupian's possessions consisted of household goods, and most of the buyers were members of the Aintab CUP, including provincial elites, civil and military officers, local state officials. Among the household items, the majority came from the kitchen, bathroom, and salon. From the kitchen, pots, soup bowls, plates, sets of cutlery, and a yogurt container were sold. From the bathroom, multiple basins, a laundry boiler, and a bath vessel were sold. Ahmet Ağa, in particular, took advantage, purchasing more items than any other buyer. A total of 7 rugs were sold, with one fetching 1,405 kurush or piastres from Demir Musi. Beyond the household goods, a number of valuable items were included for sale. There were a few pieces of silver, but most were of gold: 4 gold bracelets, 1 gold watch band, 10 gold rings, and 2 gold earrings. Additionally, a handful of other assorted items were listed, such as 1 steelyard, 1 child's pillow, and 5 trade notebooks. Many of the landed properties also of Yakupians they lost as well. So as you see, many of the landed properties lost had been in the Yakupian family for roughly 5 to 10 years. Upon close examination, the list of buyers includes various familiar names from Aramondamyan's perpetrator list. For example, although his participation in the auction was prohibited, Tevfik Efendi, the chairman of the Aintab Liquidation Commission, was one of the buyers. Among the other buyers were Dayizade Ahmet Hurşit Bey, Hacı Halil Efendi, Mennanzade Mustafa. Mennanzade Mustafa was the president of the CUP club in the city at the time, and Halilzade Ahmet, all permanent members of the Aintab CUP branch who play active roles in deportations. Besides these figures, additional buyers of the Yakupian properties can be found in the perpetrator list provided by Armenian on Aintab. These documents methodologically demonstrate that local actors assumed direct roles in the deportation and extermination of Armenians. They were motivated by material gain from the liquidated Armenian properties and benefited from a legalized regime of plunder. The Yakupian documents indicate how meticulously organized the looting was and offer a glimpse of, just a glimpse of, similar documents locked in the Ottoman archives. Another example is Danielian family. The example of Danielians is similar to many Aintab Armenians from diaspora living in Europe and the United States who still hold their title deeds. Esther Danielian Barsumyan, she was born on March 3rd, 1876 in Aintab. She was the daughter of Artin Danielian and married to Georgi Barsumyan on January 4th, 19. Her properties were liquidated during the deportation. The following immovable properties belong to Esther Danielian Barsumyan according to the deeds in the hands of her true heirs. As you see, a pistachio and mulberry orchard located at Ibrahimli near Batalhöyük within the city limits of Aintab. This orchard contains 600 pistachio and 200 mulberry trees. This property is bounded on the north by the property of Kaskancu Nerses, on the east by the property of Anzerli Ohannes, and on the south by the property of Leylekyan. In an Ottoman title deed, I mean classical conventional Ottoman title deed, they pinpoint and locate your properties according to other people's properties. Another one, a 3-story residence made of stone construction containing 16 rooms located in Hayk Mahallesi, Hayk neighborhood in Aintab. In the same yard surrounding this house is another 2-story house building used exclusively for storing pistachio nuts, raisins, and other provisions. To the north of this property, Eşekoğlu's property. To the east is the residence of Karamanukyan and Topçuyan. To the south is the property of Tütüncüyan Kirkor, and to the west is the property of Terzi Başkan. I can continue. Nazaretyans. However, in the case of Nazaretyans, there were certain exceptions to the abandoned properties laws. For example, Nazar Ağa Nazaretyan, as you can see holding his stick, Kara Nazar Ağa, also known, was a well-off dealer in antique coins and merchant. He built a magnificent home for his family in Aintab's Kayacik neighborhood. He founded a salt factory, Mazmahana, and an inn today known as Kara Nazar Ağa Hanı. A successful businessman and a leading member of the community, Nazar Ağa was appointed chief consul of Persia in Aintab by the Shah and was later appointed as the American vice consul. So, true that his family was kind of exempted from deportation and they managed to end up in Aleppo, but by losing everything they had in the city. So, as can be seen from the Yakupian's case particularly, Sarkis Yakupyan. Go back. numerous government officials, other individuals, including property assessors, auction houses, trustees, estate agents, and notaries. They were all employed to manage the administration and sale of Armenian assets through the abandoned properties laws. At the direct level of implementation, the prospect of looting motivated the local collaborators from different classes in Aintab. In most areas, the CUP relied to a considerable extent on the cooperation of local administration, institution and state officials, as well as provincial elites and ordinary citizens. The deportation and genocide of Aintab Armenians were not implemented by a rebel brought in from the countryside to carry out an act recognized as too despicable for respectable people, nor performed by Aintab's more ordinary have-nots, but rather were brought about by the district Muslim notables, landowners, dignitaries, and the city's elites. They prospered through the acquisition of Armenian property and wealth, elevating them into an even more privileged position. This process of redistributing Armenian properties illustrates the close relationship between the CUP officials and local Muslim elites. As Holocaust historian Thomas Kuhne highlights, killing and even murdering other people, terrorizing, humiliating, or causing harm to them is not just destructive. For those who perpetrate violence and terror, it's creative and rewarding. It generates a social dynamic. Perpetrators and bystanders energize social life and build collective identity through committing genocide. Desire for community, the experience of belonging, and the ethos of collectivity became the basis of mass murder. Another renowned Holocaust historian, Ömer Bartol, elucidates how the genocide against the Jews served as a mechanism for social mobility, for moving into better houses, of killed or deported Jews, taking over business, giving clothes and jewelry to one's wife or mistress, or fetching toys for one's children, all facilitating by shedding of the blood. In the same way, as well as eradicating the Armenian community, deportation was a means of reorienting the Muslim population to a new ideological identity. More than enriching individual perpetrators, plunder was a way of rewarding the quote-unquote reliable resourcing immigrants and refugees in order to properly integrate them and creating a Turkish Muslim bourgeois as a driver of national modernization in a Darwinian world of struggle. So as a native son of Gaziantep, present-day Aintab or present-day Gaziantep, I now fully realize, through having attended the same schools with grandsons and granddaughters of those elites, I myself have witnessed the consequences of Aintab Armenians' physical and material destruction. My account here can offer insight into local history, but is only a small step in understanding the complete picture of not only what happened, but also how and why these events transpired. Unseen in the archived letters, telegrams, and property lists are the trauma and suffering of Armenian survivors repeatedly subjected to attacks on their lives, culture, assets, and social status. The base motives for their former labors left some of the most indelible wounds, which more than a century later remain unhealed. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ümit, for that presentation. Again, illustrating the importance of the microhistory approach to Armenian history, especially for the genocide. And so we can only just theorize, right, hypothetically, if this is one community, how many communities there were throughout the Ottoman Empire. So the scope of it is a little bit overwhelming, but thank you for that presentation. Our final speaker this morning is going to be Dr. Hazal Özdemir. She graduated from the Northwestern University. Before coming to Northwestern, she graduated from Boğaziçi University's Department of History in 2017 and received her master's degree in the History of Art and Photography program at Birkbeck at the University of London. Her dissertation project has been funded by institutions such as the American Research Institute in Turkey, the Society for Armenian Studies, and Nasser. And she was a Gulbenkian Fellow for the academic year 2022-23. Today her topic is Undesirable Subjects in and out of the Empire, Mobility, Nationality, and Unmaking of an Ottoman Subject. Dr. Özdemir.
Hello, everyone. Many thanks for inviting me. Thanks to Barlow and Ümit for this wonderful organization. And thanks for this beautiful crowd and your friends. Before coming here, I had a lovely talk with Dr. Kizer, and he asked me how I came to study Armenian denaturalization. And I told him that through my interest in Ottoman photography. Today, I will try to illustrate my journey from photographs to denaturalization in my presentation. And after various locales as Syria, Harput, Antep, and Sivas, I'm taking you to Adana first. The guy in the photograph was sentenced to life imprisonment by Kazan trial court in 1902. The reason for his harsh punishment was disturbing the peace. The provincial governor wrote to the Interior Ministry that he was caught in sis in Kazan with guns and seditious documents, unspecified, but this might include Armenian revolutionaries' photographs or correspondences in Armenian. The Ottoman officials in Adana could not understand his nationality. Was he a British citizen or an Ottoman subject? The guy argued that he was a German citizen living in London and his name was Jack. Nevertheless, the Interior and Foreign Ministries found out that he was an Armenian named Arsan Mohayam, son of Agop. Arsan was an Arbab Fesad, meaning expert of sedition, and he was sentenced with 24 other Adanatsi for planning to create unrest in Sis. Sutrak, son of late Hacı Boyajian, was also from Kozan, Adana. He was renouncing his subjecthood and preparing to emigrate to the United States in July 1906. Sutrak's family, his mother Mariam, his big brother, who was a 23-year-old Hozier, his 12-year-old sister Zaruhi, and his little brother Armenak, who was still going to school, was living in the Yakub neighborhood of Adana. Strak was also working as a shoemaker and had a few properties in Adana. Hence, 20-year-old Sutrak had to renounce his property rights and cut all his ties with the Ottoman Empire to be able to migrate to the US. Noting that Strak was a middle height, had a mustache, black eyebrows, and a pale skin, the same police who photographed Arsan probably took his photograph. The police further argued that he took these portraits with his marifet acizi, his humble skills, and signed the photograph as a memur photograph, the officer of photography. Bogos, son of Artin, was caught in Adana in January 1907. He was originally from Van and known as Polis, son of Andon. At some point, he converted to Islam and got the name Abdulatif. Bogos, Polis, or Abdulatif, ran away to Alexandria 3 years ago and tried to return. The officer of photography of Adana police station took his photograph and wrote that he was also middle height, dull-sighted, gray-haired, had hazel eyes, and a mustache. As the correspondences between the police ministry, the interior ministry, and the Adana governorate reveals, he was on the list of undesirable people since he was moving clandestinely to the empire. Finally, Hatun embarked on a long and unpredictable journey with her two sons, Artin and Hoseb, in June 1908. The mother and the kids were preparing to emigrate to Chicago from the Shabaniye neighborhood of Adana when a police officer captured their image. Hatun told the police that they had no family left in Adana after the death of her husband, Oham. Her brothers Karbet and Sarkis emigrated to the United States 8 years ago and settled there. Hatun and her children renounced their Ottoman subjecthood, signed a document attesting that they would never return. Noting all this information on the back of Hatun's photograph, the police officer signed the visual as officer of photography, stamped and claimed that he took it with his humble skills. He was probably the same officer who took the previous photographs of undesirable subjects. Thereafter, this officer would doubly this visual into 12 and distribute each to Ottoman ministries, interior, foreign, and police, and Ottoman ports of entry and exit, including Trabzon, Samsun, and Mersin. Their Ottoman identity cards were cancelled, in addition to be erased from population registries. This family no longer existed as subjects of the Ottoman Empire, but were recorded as criminals who should be kept out. These 4 subjects, who passed from Adana, which was a raising commercial center of the empire, and a place for many Armenian laborers who left the 6 provinces to work in its cotton-rich hinterlands as seasonal laborers. An Armenian activist whose subjecthood cannot be detected. A young Armenian man leaving his family behind and seeking his fortune in the United States. An Armenian who converted, assumed different identities, and traveling within the empire illegally. And a young Armenian mother with her kids, left alone after her husband's death, trying to rebuild her future by crossing the Atlantic. They were probably photographed by the same police officer or different people holding the same office in the police station of Adana. Their photographs were taken probably at the same place, in front of a stone building, which was probably the police station. Most importantly, they were all deemed undesirable. Taking photographs as a starting point, my paper examines the late Ottoman policies of denaturalization aimed at Armenian transatlantic migrants and shows how surveillance methods devised to control mobility were a crucial part of broader repertoire of state violence and deeming Armenians undesirable. Similarly to my research, which started with examining a repository consisting of family photographs and studio portraits produced by local Armenian photographers and the police in the Ottoman State Archives, and evolved into a study of denaturalization regime in the late Ottoman Empire. I tried to understand what would put Hatun and Sutrak, who were migrating to the United States, in front of the same camera with a guy who was sentenced to life imprisonment. In other words, what was their crime? I tried to explore the bureaucratic and legal tools the Ottoman state used to narrow the boundaries for membership in the polity and prepare the ground for emptying the Ottoman landscape of Armenians. Developing documented technologies and requiring Armenian migrants to denaturalize, I argue, were complementary techniques of bureaucratization and border building in the late Ottoman Empire. While I was working with the photographs of Ottoman Armenians, I knew that Syrian and Lebanese Christians and Jews who migrated abroad were not photographed. So who were the other people whom the Hamidian administration prayed could be photographed, was the question that came to my mind. Imprisoned people, Armenian or Macedonian revolutionaries who raised their demands for autonomy in the empire, or Ottoman and European anarchists. In other words, folks whom the state labeled as undesirable subjects or experts of sedition. Hence, focusing on a locale in Adana, I tried to contextualize Armenian immigrants within a larger body of people who were seen as problems by the government. The anxieties of government about growing Armenian nationalism, which could potentially be supported by the great powers, pulled discriminatory policies towards Armenians, including harsh measures aimed at regulating their transatlantic mobility. The government singled out Armenians through the bureaucratic formalization of Armenian discrimination, which accompanied other forms of violence, such as massacres. My focus is on the reign of Abdülhamid II and how empire-wide bureaucratic networks collaborated to label Armenians as undesirable subjects and prevent migrants' return to empire. In particular, I demonstrate how nationality politics and new surveillance methods devised to control mobility created stateless subjects. To exit the empire, Armenians had to renounce their Ottoman subjecthood, sign a document attesting that they were not coming back, and they had to deliver 2 photographs to the state. I argue that the Hamidian government changed the nature of mobility of these migrants, which started as a temporary sojourn for male members of the families, but turned into an exile. Armenian transcontinental mobility coincided with the age of high imperialism, which involved technological innovations such as steamships and trains, faster and more efficient connections between places, and the emergence of interstate conflicts about the new regulation and surveillance systems such as quarantines, checkpoints, and passports. The industrial boom in North America created the demand for cheap labor and pushed transcontinental traffic. Already, the increased involvement of the Ottoman Empire in globalizing world economy had resulted in the deterioration of home industries. Add to this a heavy burden of taxation and targeted land confiscation situation in Armenian provinces, and one can see the confluence of circumstances propelling Armenian exodus. Like many Eurasian migrants, Armenians did not intend to remain in the Western Hemisphere, but wanted to earn money to pay their debts in the Ottoman Empire and return. Although transatlantic mobility was mostly circular, the emphasis on the terminology of emigrant and immigrant is an outcome of unidirectional understanding and highlighted status. Quite the contrary, Italians, Greeks, Czechs, Sephardic Jews, Lebanese and Syrian Christians, and Armenians moved and relocated frequently from the Old World. Nevertheless, return was not easy for Armenians. While I was doing research at the Noubar Library in Paris, I had a chance to read a variety of Armenian newspapers published in the US, such as Hike. Hike discussed the difficulties of Armenian returnees facing the Ottoman domains. For example, an Ottoman official who saw the American passport of an Armenian who returned to take his fiancée with him spat on his documents. Another Armenian who tried to enter the empire from Thessaloniki to see his mother was imprisoned for 8 days and then sent to Serbia. As the work of historians on Greater Syrian migration has shown, the Hamidian administration encouraged Syrian, Palestinian, and Lebanese migrants to keep their Ottoman subjecthood and return to the empire. Hence, this bureaucratic apparatus was built for Armenians only. The same officials who tolerated Arab migration linked the harsh cautionary bureaucratic measures on Armenians with the belief that they would bring their seditious ideas, such as autonomy, when they returned to the empire. The harsh migration policies of the government left Armenian migrants in a transnational state of limbo by denying their subjecthood status, abrogating their properties, and foreclosing their ability to return. Ottoman officials linked the cautionary bureaucratic measures on Armenians' return with the belief that they learned how to use dynamite and torpedo in the US, and they would initiate armed resistance since they were migrating with the sole purpose of combat training. Although there was probably a handful of Armenian revolutionaries among migrants who left for the US, the state also exiled or imprisoned ordinary Armenians who returned. For example, the governor of Harput wrote a letter to the Interior Ministry and asked what to do with Ohannes, his uncle Sirop, and their friend Sarkis, who also migrated to the US, but with the purpose of earning money. The governor knew that Fasad, seditious people who escaped, should not be allowed in the empire, but he asked what to do about the laborers. The minister dismissed the governor's desire to differentiate mobilities and said that no matter why they migrated, Armenians should be treated as the initial decision made in 1896. Those who returned would be directly expelled and sent back to the US immediately. So the Hamidian government singled out Armenian transatlantic mobility as peculiar, suspicious, and dangerous. Ottoman state's differentiation between mobilities of diverse ethno-religious groups established a distinction between subjects who could move freely with the state permission and Armenians who were prohibited from returning. It might be argued that the draconian measures of the Hamidian government towards Armenian transatlantic mobility were due to the spread of nationalism among Armenians and formation of revolutionary organizations in and out of the empire. Nevertheless, revolutionary committees that aimed for autonomy had developed among all the Christian communities of the empire. Armenian revolutionaries emerged under oppression and maladministration as their Greek, Serbian, and Macedonian counterparts. And they modeled their activism on Macedonian revolutionaries who followed similar tactics to get great powers' attention. And although Armenian organizations' activities were limited in numbers and scope, and unlike Macedonian revolutionaries, they were not able to mobilize large numbers of seditious people, the Armenian community was punished more violently. The policing strategies of Hamidian officialdom became harsher as the peak of Armenian migration coincided with anti-Armenian massacres between 1894 and 96 in both the eastern provinces and in Istanbul. Especially after the storming of Ottoman Bank by Armenian revolutionaries in August 1896, the government issued a decree that required Armenians who wanted to leave to renounce their Ottoman subjecthood submit a document attesting that they were not coming back. And although there was a separate office dealing with denial special subcommission was built under the Interior Ministry to deal with Armenian migrants. So it seems that Armenian migration was linked more to imperial security, and it was a threat to the integrity of the empire. The meaning of renouncing subjecthood, terk tabiyet, becomes clearer in a historical trajectory that began in 1869, when the Ottoman law of nationality was passed. The Hamidian government was monitoring Armenians' denaturalization at the end of the 19th century according to this law, which argued that the Ottoman government could deny return and subjecthood to the person who, without imperial authorization, changes nationality or enters the military service of a foreign state. Ottoman subjects were not allowed to change their subjecthood status without the permission of the state. If they did so, they would still be counted as Ottomans. Denaturalization still happens the same way in Turkey. Only states can denaturalize people, and if someone tries to denaturalize themselves, they would still count as Turkish by the government. The final article of the 1869 law argues that each person living in the Ottoman domains would be regarded as an Ottoman, and anyone who claimed to be a foreigner had to provide evidence. Since the works on Ottoman nationality have been mostly done by political scientists, the meaning and the connotation of the term tabiyet and the social roots of the nationality law were overlooked. Tabiyet could be translated as subjecthood, nationality, or allegiance. Some historians either translate the term as citizenship or regard the 1869 law as a citizenship law. But historians such as Bill Henley, on the other hand, argues that citizenship is the wrong word to use because citizens are full members of the society whose positions were secure, while the Ottoman subjecthood law mainly concerned children and wives of foreigners, orphans, emigrants, and immigrants, so whose positions were least certain. I argue that the 1869 law did not aspire to create a citizenry and political belonging, but created a form of legal affiliation and aimed to define the rights and protections of subjects. Rather than seeing the nationality code as a combination of previous centralizing reforms, such as Tanzimat, we can associate it with the history of foreign interference in the Ottoman Empire. In 1774, after the loss of the Crimean Khanate, the Küçük Kaynarca Agreement forced the Ottoman state to give the Russian imperial government the right to establish an Orthodox church in the capital, in addition to the right to protect Orthodox Christian subjects. Russia would employ these capitulations as a pretext for their interventions in the Balkans. Britain and France also stepped in for a number of times and used these capitulations which were granted to them. And the Paris Treaty of 1856 formalized and further entrenched capitulatory agreements granting European subjects and proteges, which are protected subjects, extraterritorial rights and privileges, such as immunities from Ottoman law and taxation. What I mean here is if a European subject or an American subject is living in the Ottoman Empire, they could be not taxed and they could be not punished by the Ottoman government. So historians argue that the meaning, like the background of these nationality measures was coming from the Ottoman state's desire to prevent foreign people from residing in the empire. And I work with diverse denaturalization cases in the Ottoman Empire, such as people who were emigrating to Europe, becoming European citizens, becoming French, British, and trying to continue living in the empire. And what I recognize is other Christians or Jews of the empire who became European citizens and continued to live in the Ottoman Empire was treated like in this manner. Like the Ottoman Empire tried to prevent people from becoming foreign citizens and live in the empire because they would be exempt from tax and penalty mechanisms. However, I regard the policies of Abdülhamid II towards Armenian transatlantic mobility as a different thing. So the draconian measures on making Armenians renounce their Ottoman subjecthood was not something linked to extraterritoriality or trying to preventing foreigners from residing in the Ottoman Empire. It was, in my opinion, demographic engineering, which could be defined as a state policies that aims to shift ethno-religious balance and composition of the empire, transforming and managing its population in accordance with the preferences of the government. Ümit Kurt defines demographic engineering as encompasses the exercise of all possible state policies aimed at changing the composition of a given society. Donald Gluckson uses demographic engineering and population policies interchangeably as series of coercive state measures in pursuit of population homogeneity. Demographic engineering involves forced assimilation, deportation, and putting economic and social pressures on certain communities that eventually force them to leave the country. As I said at the beginning, Armenian labor migration was not deportation. Nonetheless, the denaturalization requirement and the ban on return drastically changed the nature of Armenian mobility and turned it into a project of demographic engineering. Scrutinizing the division of labor, the decision-making processes, and the continuous communication and record-keeping between central and provincial officials who regulated the mobility of Armenians demonstrate that these empire-wide networks required ordinary officials who worked in synchronization and collaboration, a bureaucratic establishment, lots of patience, and a strong motivation. There are billions of documents about coming back and forth between Interior Ministry, Policy Ministry, Foreign Ministry, and provincial officials about how to deal with denaturalizing Armenian migrants. After examining a lot of them, I argue that creating a bureaucratic apparatus for monitoring and policing the transatlantic mobility of Armenians who had become undesirable subjects was a crucial phase of state-sanctioned violence. We are better accustomed to the physical violence happened in the late Ottoman Empire, such as massacres and the genocide, but I try to see the bureaucratic side of this violence and try to understand how denaturalization policies aim to complement the physical violence aimed at Armenians. I employ the term bureaucratic violence, therefore, which is administrated through processes of decision-making, paperwork, knowledge production, discrimination, negligence, and exclusion. In my work, this concept refers to how Hamidian government gathered and produced knowledge to target one ethno-religious community and normalize their discrimination. I see Armenian denaturalization as a crucial step in the transition from the empire to the nation-state, and argue that this ethno-religious discrimination profoundly shaped Ottoman nationality and Turkish citizenship. Although the focus on Armenian ethnic cleansing, the genocide, so therefore the policies of the CUP, I try to take the focus back to the Hamidian era and establish the background of demographic engineering projects, which would get more violent a decade later. What I try to establish is Tarkitabiyet, in other words, denaturalization, as the beginning of more standardized border building and mobility policy projects, such as the Armenian genocide, deportations, and followed Greek-Turkish population exchange of 1923. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Hazal. So one other way of looking at things through photography, through bureaucratic violence, and again, it's a very fitting conclusion to our conference. Now, we're going to have a few minutes, an opportunity for some questions and answers, and I'd like to give the first opportunity to our panelists, that is our presenters, if they have any questions that maybe they have for any of them, including yesterday's presentation. So we can open it up for that, and then we'll open it up for